Okay, so I wanted to do a quick tutorial on showing you guys how to make mock-ups that look as real as possible. Now, I realize that there are people who will look at this and say, oh, that's obviously not real. But I mean, okay, you're not going to fool everyone, and that's not necessarily the goal, is to like totally lie to everyone. um, but to try to give a more accurate representation of how it would feel on someone is kind of the goal. For me, I like to make mock-ups look as real as possible when I'm doing like selling actual physical products instead of digitals, mostly because it deters people from stealing your artwork. So you could put watermarks over them, and you absolutely should put watermarks over your designs. But to me, if you make a design get this warped and wrinkled and different than the actual digital itself, then you don't have to watermark that. If somebody decides to screenshot this and erase the background and the hair and try to use this, then that's on them. They will have a horrible quality design when in reality, this is what it looks like. Okay, not that color, but wherever my pink mint is. Oh, it's not even that one. But it's supposed to be straight like that. Okay, so for images like these ones where I'm doing mock-ups like this, I have a grid over the top of them to keep people from being able to just steal them. But when I'm doing it on a mock-up like this, I try to avoid having to put as much branding and stuff on it as possible, and I like to try to make it look like they're actually on models. So the idea here is I'm going to show you how I do this. So first, I use Photoshop. There are other options, but Photoshop is what I have used for almost 20 years, and I'm stubborn and I will not use anything else. And that's what I know. So that's what I'm going to use to show you today. How I like to start is I just start with a new document and I pick the size that I want my product images to be. Now, I have 3 websites now, but the one that I'm currently working on, I decided that in my experience, having all of your images square just makes life easier in the long run. And so for this website, I'm doing them all square. The previous website, I had them kind of more of a rectangle. Sometimes when you're posting on social media, it crops things weird. Instagram, especially, it makes things wrap cleaner. So I chose to go with squares. And the size that I'm using is 1800 by 1800 and 72 pixels per inch. That is really important when you're doing images that are going to go online. The resolution for website graphics should always be 72 dpi. The reasoning for that is, one, it keeps your file size smaller so everything loads faster for your customers, but 2, you're not giving away high resolution artwork to people. And chances are your website and all of that is going to do some compressing anyway. So to try to optimize your file size is ideal. So always use 72 pixels per inch or DPI for website graphics. I use RGB, and this color profile is the one that I have found to be the most consistent across all devices, printers, screens, etc. None of them will ever be perfect because every computer and device is different, but this color profile is the one I use. So this is how I start with all of my mock-ups. Then I pull in the image that I want to use. So I'm picking one that's not going to be super hard to show you. This is a bundle that I purchased from Minimalist Mockups on Etsy. They have some really pretty mock-ups with models, which is what I prefer. A lot of them have wrinkles, which I like, but that only works if you're doing them this way, dropping it flat. Doesn't really work that well. She does have some more flat ones, but again, there are wrinkles involved. But I was specifically looking for wrinkles. So rather than showing you one with a knot, because that is a little bit harder to do, I think I'm going to use this one. We have wrinkles, but not too many wrinkles. And I'm just going to do white because I know that most of you guys do sublimation, and so white is what you're usually working with. So I bring it in, and then I decide how I want it to be cropped into my square. So the idea is I like to show a little bit of the vibe of what's going on around her, but the design should still be the focus and in center here. So I think I'm going to do, maybe I'll just do that. You see there's some still some stuff going on around her and her hair. And so we'll drop it right like that. Then the first step that I do, I always use smart objects. The reason why I use smart objects is once you set it up once to do all of the warping and shadows and effects that you want on it, you don't have to keep doing that again for every design. So this is a Photoshop specific thing, although I am being told that there are some other design programs out there like Affinity that can honor them once they're created, if I understand correctly, but they can't create smart objects in and of themselves. So I don't know, there's not sure about other design software, but in Photoshop we're going to create a smart object. So here's what we do here is I grab my little box tool and I decide where I want the maximum boundaries of my artwork to be. So I'm just going to do this right here. I don't know why I keep putting curves on the end. That should be square. What color you make it is irrelevant. Black was just the color that I had chosen here. So now over here you could see that there is a rectangle floating above. If you right click on that, you can hit convert to smart object. So once you double click on that, now we have a whole different file open up here. So I'm going to hide this black because I don't want the black anymore. I'm going to come and grab the same design that I was using earlier, just so you guys can kind of see to compare. Plus this one is this style of design is nice when you're setting these up because it's square, and so you see exactly how you're warping it for future designs. Like sometimes if the design is like some kind of random shape, you don't necessarily see what you're doing. So I like to try to set up my smart objects and mock-ups with a somewhat square design the first time anyway. Now this, the way that I chose where it went was over the whole shirt area. So this is where I would decide if I want it to be kind of a little bit higher on her shirt and maybe a little bit smaller. So I like to make it a little bit bigger than it should be, just so I have some leeway of where I might be putting the design on the shirt. So I'm going to try right here. Sometimes it takes a couple of tries. Apparently my screen recorder software thinks my hotkey for save is also pause. So sorry, there's a little skip there. But you hit save, and then it'll update it on this end. So the first thing that I like to do is bring in my shadows and my highlights. Now, if you're doing sublimation, then that is actually a little bit easier to an extent. If you come over to this layer and you just change the blending mode to multiply, these shadows will start to kind of come through a little bit, but it doesn't exactly do, it's not perfect. And I will show you why. Now what's nice about it is, see how there's white in Be Pretty? If you're doing sublimation, you're not going to see that white and it's standing out against the white shirt. So sometimes it's easier to just adjust the color and brightness of your mock-up so that your white shirt looks white and then you don't notice the difference there. If you change it to multiply, it takes that white out, but then sometimes it makes your color look a little bit faded. Darken is also an option that helps with that, where it can pull the white out. But again, sometimes it messes with the colors, so you have to kind of tweak it a little bit. Personally, for sublimation, I usually just stick with multiply, and then I will adjust the opacity just a little bit so that it's more accurate depending on the polyester content of your shirt. Now, if you actually do want to start showing some of these shadows, I'm just going to go back to this normal here. So I'm going to show you what I do if you're setting this up for screen printing or direct to garment or vinyl, where you would see the white. And so I'm skipping that one step, but this will still work for sublimation if you turn on one of these blending modes here so that it takes that white out for you. But I will show you that at the end, kind of the difference there. So we're going to leave our smart object on this layer above. I actually like to rename it. I'm hitting buttons and it keeps trying to restart this, so I'm hoping I'm not getting too bad of glitches here. Okay. Okay, so smart object. I really hope that I didn't just lose a bunch of information. I guess we'll come back and see that in a second. The stupid pause. Okay, so for the shadows and the highlights, I take your actual mock-up and I duplicate it and I put it over the top of everything. And I go and, well, okay, first of all, I need to rasterize it. See how there's this little icon right here? It's linking to it, and I want to be able to modify it. So you know what, this is easier. I'm just going to right click and I'm going to hit rasterize layer. And then we're going to go to image, adjustments, saturation. I'm going to take out all of the color. And then image, adjustment, brightness, and contrast. So right here, the goal is, see all these wrinkles and highlights? We want to make them super exaggerated. So I'm going to put the contrast all the way up and darken it just a little bit so we could see them being more exaggerated. Then we take this layer right here and change the blending mode to hard light, and then right click on it and hit create clipping mask, so it only messes with the actual design that's in the smart object. And then here's where you could start to see your adjustments. Clearly this is way too bright. So if we click back on this layer while it's already masking and doing what you want, you can come in here and tweak it again. So we're going to go to adjustments, brightness and contrast, and we're going to start playing with the brightness and the contrast to get it to look more real. So do you see how now we have shadows and highlights coming in across the design? That is the goal, without making it too bright or too dark. depending on the whole light and vibe of your mock-up. So I'm just going to, sometimes I come back and tweak this like a million times. Sometimes you tweak it a little bit just depending on the design itself, but I'm going to leave it like this for now. Sometimes you get this weird kind of distortion thing going on where the texture of the shirt, here, look, I'll show you. Once you mess with it that much, see how it starts to look, there's a lot of noise and it starts to make it look kind of poor quality, and that starts to show up in your mask there. So what I do like to do sometimes is come up to filter and we go to noise and hit reduce noise, and see how you can kind of smooth that out a little bit depending on your settings over here. If it gets really bad, I'll come in and I will go to blur and go to Gaussian blur and just a little bit. You know, we don't want to lose the highlights and the shadows, but I mean, you could see the distortion there. I'm just trying to smooth it out just a little bit. Now, if you're doing sublimation, the texture of the shirt showing through is okay. Sometimes that's really helpful. If you're doing vinyl or screen print transfers where you're going to see it's on top and a little bit more shiny, then you really don't want that kind of bumpy texture showing through on your highlights and shadows. So I like to kind of clean that up sometimes. So I'm going to go back to hard light and turn my clipping mask back on so you could see my highlights and shadows there. Sometimes you could just adjust the opacity if it's still, you know, like a little too much or not enough. Really, that's just a matter of tweaking the brightness and contrast yourself. If you are doing sublimation and you want to come back in and go into this darken or multiply, you can do that. Now see how this makes it really dirty? That's kind of what the multiply does sometimes. So we could lighten up our highlights and shadows a little bit. But you can also come in here and on your smart object layer, go to adjustments, which if you don't see adjustments, it's going to be window adjustments. And you can go to brightness and contrast, and it's going to do this just to this layer. See how there's a little arrow here? So we could brighten up the design a little bit if you want to, and then do the same thing with the saturation. So we're adding a saturation mask on this one too. So if you want to try to fix the colors a little bit, you can absolutely do that just with some adjustment layers. But again, I prefer to just leave the design alone as much as possible, so that your colors are nice and bright. And again, that depends on if you're doing sublimation versus vinyl or whatever. Okay, so the last step that I would do for this, because we have our highlights and shadows on there. This is bugging me. I'm going to add just a little bit more of a shadow. I want to see a little bit more of that right there. Yeah, like that. Okay, so the last thing that I would do is we're going to come back to your smart object here and click on it so you see the whole thing. Sometimes it looks super pixelated and weird when you're in here, but that's fine. Ignore that. We are going to warp it. So the way that she's angled, things should be kind of more crunched together on this side and a little bit more stretched out on this side. And typically across the breast area, things are going to be a little bit wider and a little bit narrower down here. So if you go up to image, just kidding, edit, transform, there's a few different things we can use. The first one, skew. You can come in here and just grab your corners and kind of make that do a little bit of what you're thinking here, just by adjusting the angle, like so. And then I like to come in and I go to warp. Now, depending on how complex you want to get this, see all these grids? You can adjust that to fewer grids or more grids. It all depends on how wrinkled you want to make it. I'll just go ahead and show you on with this just kind of crazy grids. See what this does here? So sometimes it's easier to just, okay, kind of push things out a little. Let's curve that here. You see how it's going over the wrinkle in that shirt. So it all kind of depends on how much you want to mess with it, to kind of mimic what's going on with the shirt. You don't have to get this crazy with it. It all just depends on how much you feel like warping it and how much fun you want to have with it, I guess. But the idea is to try to get it to look like it is wrapping around the parts of the shirt as the shirt is wrinkled. So let's go ahead and move this one down a little bit. I feel like this needs to kind of curl down here. So it's just a matter of how much you want to mess with it, how much you would like to make that warp with what's going on. And you could spend a lot of time doing this. It's just kind of a matter of playing with it. Now I mean, honestly, that's not awful. I would usually spend more time with that, but there are easier ways to do that if you wanted to. Let's go back into warp. Up here, this grid, you could go all the way to, discard my edits, sure. We're gonna go one column and one row. Can make for a really easy way to just do some simple warping. I am not doing this with any like particular smart way, but just showing you kind of a general, that's a lot less scary version of a warp if you wanted to, but that's literally just one column and one row. So just depending on how complex you want to get it, all depends on how many grids you're putting in here. I'm going to go back to this one. When I do get it how I like it, this top layer with the shading and the highlights, if you hit the little lock icon on there, that will make your life a lot easier later. So you can actually mess with your smart object a little bit more. I am going to rasterize my background layer and just brighten this whole mock-up up just a little bit. Now, because I did that, I'm going to brighten up my highlights and shadow layers. Try to make it look a little bit more airy and bright. And again, I would probably mess with this just a little bit more. I feel like this needs to be kind of up with this curl, this wrinkle a little bit more. But yeah, I feel like you can kind of see what I'm doing here. Let's move this whole thing in just for future designs. You see the grid, kind of the idea behind it is this, you want the grid to match the shirt so that when we put in another design that it does the same thing. And I will show you what I mean. Oh, and I need to show you one more thing too. So we're just gonna go ahead and kind of finish gridding this out a little here. Okay, so I feel like that's probably a pretty decent grid here. If you go double click on your smart object, we can go and drop in a different design. Same concept. Hit save. So that in theory it drops where you want it with the edits that you want and all of your shading and highlights that you want. I would say that is too big for this particular design on this shirt. And actually, I think I would do this. So that's why I like to make it a little bit bigger than it should be. So you just have some room to kind of move it around without messing with your warping. That's kind of the key here. Now, this doesn't look like it's warped very much. So the center of my design of the other one might be a little bit too clean right in the middle. So I'm going to go back. Oh, come on. Let's look back at my warp. Yeah, see, the inside is pretty, I mean, it doesn't start to get a little bit messed up until like right here in the middle. So I am going to let's make this stuff a little bit bigger right across her chest. Like that, and it looks like I'm gonna have this kind of wrinkle down here. So again, it all kind of depends on what you're working with and how big of a change you think it's going to take in order to look like it's being messed with in the way that you want it to be messed with. But usually if I do this with a couple of mock-ups and then I drop a few more in, it really gives me the accuracy, the accuracy that I'm going for. Sometimes you just have to see it with a couple different designs first to kind of see what's really going on with it. So now if I come back, I'm going to put this one back on and hit save. You know, I actually feel like that only helped it. So sometimes it helps to just kind of tweak it with a couple different options. It does look a little bit dark to me on this one. I'm just going to go lighten the opacity on it. But again, you just have to tweak that sometimes for different designs. If you're doing sublimation, let's lighten that up maybe just a little bit so it's a little bit more faded. But yeah, that is how I do my mock-ups, that I'm trying to make them look a little bit more accurate, which I actually find are really fun to do. Oh, okay, the last thing that I wanted to show you was if you happen to have a design that is going to go behind some hair, which is one of my favorite things. I have one I did yesterday. See the hair? That's actually the greatest way to protect a design. But find a mock-up that's got some hair that's going to be in the way. Not too much hair where it's going to detract from the actual design. You want your customers to see what it says, but like, I feel like this is still pretty clear that this says on a dark desert highway. So to do that, this mock-up is not a great representation of that, but just for fun, I am going to pretend like, let me lock this so I can actually mess with it here. Let's move this all the way up here and see if we can get it to go behind her hair. Okay, there. Behind her hair. Now there's some serious shadow up there, so that's kind of hard to see, but there. So let's show you real quick on how I do that. So down here on this main layer where your mock-up is, if you grab your little selection tool and let's just grab her hair like this. Make sure you're on the layer of the actual mock-up, not the design. Right click and hit layer via copy. So if you see over here, there's this weird little floating hair. We're going to move this all the way up to the top. And as you can see, it covered up everything where there's white right there. If you put that to the top and you come over here to your eraser tool and go to background eraser, now this can take a little bit of tweaking sometimes to get the right tolerance and how you want it exactly. But this is what I do, is I just use the background eraser, and see, I feel like I need a little bit more tolerance on that one because it's got a weird white thing happening here. So it's actually a super high contrast between her hair and the shirt. This should be a pretty easy one because it's pretty much black on white. So let's try this with a higher tolerance. Let's just go ahead and make this bigger because we can. There's that. We need to get rid of this little white right there. But yeah, you just go and erase the background. Kind of see some of it floating a little bit. then that makes it so it's covering up whatever design shows up in that area. Just like that. It goes right over the top. So then I just leave that there. Now, I'm not going to leave the design right there, but that is the general concept of how I make these smart objects. Now, honestly, I would probably play with this just a little bit more. This is kind of weird to me, but again, you could spend a lot of time messing with these, and it all depends on how perfect you want to make it. Actually, I feel like that helped quite a bit. There's just kind of this weird kind of bubble right there that I'm not necessarily a huge fan of. That there. Now, once you get it to a point that you like it, you would go to File. I do export, and I export as a JPEG. I know that when you're doing sublimation, everybody says a PNG file is the answer to all of your problems. But if you have no need for a transparent background to be in your final file, then it is better to use a JPEG file. JPEG files are higher quality for images. PNG files are normally more meant for text, and JPEG files are smaller, so it'll load faster on your website. So I use a JPEG file for when I'm exporting it. So one last quick little thing before I wrap this up, just a little fun little idea if you really want to blow your mind. You could set these up with artboards and do every single one. Now I haven't finished going through all of these yet. If you see this one, her hair is not covering this up. I've been working my way through the top and kind of tweaking these, but like this one's behind her hair. I have this one set up and this one set up. But you can pull in more than one mock-up at a time and put them all on separate artboards, and then have your design up here and just change it and hit save in your smart object. Now this is a bigger file, so it's going to take a second. And it'll go and change it in all of them. And then you could decide which one you want to use. For this one, I really like it on the black. I like it on the gray. I like it on the blue. The navy, I think, is the one I ended up using. So any of these, if you have more than one artboard, and you set them all up together like this, let's say I want the navy. If you right click on the navy artboard, you can hit export as, and it will just export that one artboard instead of all of them. And so you don't have to open up, a bunch of different files here to do all of your mock-ups or decide which mock-up you want to use for what design. You can use artboards in Photoshop. So it does take a little bit of processing power when you have this much going on. In fact, it wouldn't even let me save it as a PSD file. This is a PSB file because it was too large for a PSD file. So this is a whole different beast, but kind of a fun beast if that was something that you wanted to really get fancy and set up. As you could do it with different artboards and get them all with the same, that we got some warping in here and we've got shadows and there's the wrinkles and it also helps if you're doing vinyl or screen prints or I mean, even sublimation will help show you how things will show up on different colors. Obviously with sublimation, none of this white would show up. You would not be doing this on a navy blue shirt, period. But you can go through and turn the blending mode on these to that multiply, and then very quickly get an idea of what colors you may or may not want to offer the shirt on. I clicked on the wrong one. We need the smart object to go to multiply, because it'll give you an idea of how it would turn out. So yellow, not so great. Pink, that's still pretty cute. This is white, so obviously you'd be fine there. But anyway, just one little little idea of something more you could do if you wanted to, and that's what I've been setting up. Our whole documents of artboards with different themed mock-ups to help me decide what colors and whatnot to offer. So anyway, hopefully this helps show you some ideas on some different ways to make your mock-ups a little bit more fun.